Hey everyone, Theo here. Today I'm reviewing the ASUS ProArt PA169CDV, which is a 15.6-inch touchscreen pen display. First of all, disclaimer, this is a review unit on loan from ASUS Singapore, and in this video I'll just present to you my findings so that you can decide whether or not this is worth the money. And the retail price for this is US $899, and the tentative retail price here in Singapore is $1,399. At the time of making this video, I don't have the official release date yet. A pen display, in case you don't know, is actually a monitor that you can draw on, and since it's a monitor, you will have to connect this to a computer in order to use it. So even though this pen display is quite thin, it's not a tablet because there is no built-in battery and there is no tablet OS. This review is going to be quite long because this is not a straightforward product for me to review due to the software features. So if you want to save time, you can check out the text review that I have already written or use the timestamps provided to jump to different sections of the video. Let me give you the bottom line up front. This is a good looking pen display with solid build quality. The visual quality is fantastic. I measured color support for 99% sRGB and over 90% ODB RGB and over 400 nits brightness. So this is a vibrant and bright display, and the resolution is 4K UHD, so all the visuals look really sharp. The drawing surface is matte textured, so you do get that tactile drawing experience. However, the surface is on the smoother side. One of the main selling points of this display, of course, is the touch screen support that you can use with finger gestures. So when you're drawing, it lets you work more fluidly. You can pan, zoom, and rotate for almost all the drawing apps. Another key selling feature is, well, this display is compatible with Windows, and because you can use this with Windows, you can use this with desktop OS, which really is a key selling point because for the price, US $899, if you have no intention of using desktop software, for the same price you can actually buy tablets such as the iPad Pro or the Samsung tablets with pen support. This is actually not ASUS' first pen display because they do make other displays, laptops, foldables, tablets that come with pen support. Now, this pen display is a bit different compared to the other products in the sense that ASUS has decided to use the Wacom EMR technology for the pen instead of their own ASUS pen, which is a good move because the Wacom EMR technology has better accuracy and performance consistency. Let's talk about the downsides and limitations, and there are some potential deal breakers. The first one is there is no Mac driver and software, and if you use Windows, you have to go through some setup so that you can enable pen support, touch support, and you have to do some troubleshooting to find out how to prevent conflicts with the touch gestures of Windows versus the touch gestures for those drawing apps. If you use a dual display setup, note that there is no switch display feature, which means when your cursor is on this display, you cannot use a shortcut to switch the cursor to the other display. So to get the cursor to the other display, you either have to switch from your pen to using a mouse or the touchpad, so that will take some time to get used to. There's another missing feature which is a huge potential deal breaker. So the ASUS driver or software does not provide system-wide customization for pen pressure, which is to say that you will have to rely on the drawing app that you're using to customize pen pressure. For drawing apps where you cannot customize the pen pressure, the line variation that you can get from this pen will be limited, and that's going to affect drawing performance and experience. For example, you can be drawing with a really thick brush and you want to draw the thin lines by applying minimal pressure. It's very difficult to draw those thin lines, even though the pen is capable of drawing very thin lines. This app is Medibank Paint. Let me show you Clip Studio where you can actually customize the pen pressure. So I'm going to draw the same box with really thick lines. That's how thick the brush is. And now if I want to draw the thin lines, see how thin the line is? So this is significantly thinner, relatively speaking, compared to the thick lines that I have here. So you can see the variance of the thin and thick is very noticeable. But with mini bank paint, where you cannot customize the pen pressure, this is the type of line quality you can get. So if your main illustration app does not provide pen pressure customization, you should not buy this pen display. Those are the main pros and cons, and I will talk more about others later. Let's move on to the full review. This is the packaging box built by Wacom. So let's have a look. So it seems like everything is neatly packed inside, and I will just unbox everything first. Okay, this is nice. We have the warranty information. This is the pen display. So these are all the items included in the box. We have the warranty information, quick start guide, color calibration, testing report. The gamma is 2.14 and the color accuracy, average delta E is 0.55. Anything less than 2 is good, so this is really good. Grayscale tracking and gamma value. The marketing material also mentions the display is Kalman verified and Pantone validated. Next we have the carrying case with rather long handles. So there is a big pocket here with padding inside and a smaller zip pocket here by the side, also with padding inside. This is a 1 meter long full-size HDMI to full-size HDMI cable, a 1 meter long braided USB-C to USB-C video cable. We have the pen, the power cable, there are 2, and this is the USB-C charger. This provides 15 watts of power. Let's look at the physical design first before we connect this to a computer. Now this is a pen display that supports touch. The build quality is really solid, and we can see the matte textured drawing surface. This is quite thin. There are 2 plastic feet instead of rubber feet. And here there is some rubber padding. This looks like a tripod mount to me, so the rubber padding is probably for the tripod plate. These are the buttons, the controls, and the ports on the left side. So that's the power button. This wheel can be used to adjust settings when you're using digital art software, and you can use this to scroll through the OSD menu as well. This is the toggle switch for locking the wheel between the free scrolling and the clicking scrolling. Now this wheel is made with plastic and it feels quite cheap, so perhaps ASUS should have used denser plastic or metal for this. And that's the OSD manual, a full-size HDMI port, 2 USB-C ports. This will accept video input and power, and this will accept power. If you use HDMI video connection, you will need to connect this display to additional power using either one of these ports. If you're using USB-C video connection, it is possible to just use a single cable for connection, which will provide video, data, and power. However, if your computer does not provide enough power through your USB-C port, then you will still have to connect additional power to this pen display. On the back, there are 4 rubber feet, and this is matte textured. It's actually matte textured on all the 6 sides, by the way. This display actually has 2 fold-out stands. These 2 stands are made with metal, so be careful not to have the corner here hit your wooden table. It will make a dent on your table. So the lower stand is used to deploy the display more vertically, and this is the more upright position, and this is the lowest angle. It's actually locked at this angle. This stand can also deploy your display in portrait orientation as well, and it's, I would say, quite stable. And that's the reason why there are no ports here on this side. There are some small holes here, and there is actually a speaker here, and also on the other side. Unfortunately, the audio quality is not good. The audio volume is not loud and the audio sounds hollow. So to deploy the display at a lower angle, just fold a big stand in and use the smaller stand. And this is quite stable because there are two pieces of rubber feet here. So this is not going to move much on the table. And this is a comfortable angle to work with for drawing. Now if you need to prop up the display higher, well, you probably need to buy your own stand where you can adjust the height, because you can only get two heights with these two stands. And this stand has a downside. I mean, the lower stand has a downside. In order to deploy the stand, you have to lift the display up to reach the ledge beneath, because the stand is not extended all the way to the edge. So it's not possible for you to push the stand out from the edge. And this is the pen holder at the top, which can be used to keep the pen. I've just connected the ASUS display to this laptop running Windows 11. Now this display is compatible only with Windows if you want to get pen input and the touch gestures working, because only the Windows driver is available. If you connect this display to a Mac or to a Linux computer, this is just a normal display without pen support and without touch support. I'm using three cables here: HDMI to HDMI, USB-C to USB-C, and this is to the power outlet behind. Now this laptop can actually output video from the USB-C port, but for some reason the connection doesn't work. I have tried to connect this display to my Mac and to the Samsung tablet using USB-C cable, and there is video, so I'm not sure why USB-C to USB-C doesn't work for this laptop, which is why I have to use HDMI. If USB-C works, I would use USB-C video, because you can use one single cable connection, which really reduces cable clutter. Before color calibrating the ASUS display, you must change the color depth from 8-bit, which is the default, to 10-bit, because this is actually a 10-bit display. And the app that I am using to change that is Intel Graphics Command Center, because I wasn't able to use the Windows display settings to change that. I am not sure whether this app can run properly on computers that are using the AMD processor, because this is an Intel app. So in this app, under Display, General, Color Depth, you can change it from 8-bit to 10-bit. And there is also the option for 12-bit, interestingly. After changing that, you go back to Windows Display Settings, and you can see the bit depth here is now 10-bit. However, the resolution is 3840 by 2160, running at 30 Hz. Once I switch back to 8-bit color depth, now this is running at 60 Hz. I only have 2 weeks to review this display, so unfortunately I do not have the time to go troubleshoot and find out whether it's possible to run this display with 10-bit color support with 4K UHD resolution at 60 Hz. The difference between 8-bit and 10-bit color support on this display is not substantial. The difference is just 1 percentage point. I measured color support for 99% sRGB, 91% ODB-RGB, 87% P3, and 86% NTSC. The color measurements are good, but not as good compared to what I was expecting from a 10-bit color display. I was actually expecting 95% ODB-RGB or higher. Having said that, the colors on this display do look good, they look vibrant, and everything looks really sharp. I measure a maximum brightness of 410 nits, so this display is quite bright. This display is noticeably brighter compared to many other pen displays that I have reviewed from other brands. So even when there is reflection on the display, this is still bright enough to go through the diffuse reflections. For some of the color modes here available from the OSD menu, you can't even change the brightness because the brightness is locked. And the resolution of this display is 4K 3840 by 2160 on this 15.6-inch display. All the visuals look really sharp without pixelation. The bezels are quite thin on both sides and uniform on these 3 sides, thicker at the bottom, and that's the ProArt logo. This is an IPS LCD display, so the viewing angles are pretty good. There is minimal color shift and drop in brightness when viewed from extreme angles, and that's the anti-glare. For matte textured drawing surfaces, there is usually slight grain or color noise that will affect the image quality, and from what I can see, there is minimal grain and color noise on this ASUS display. The reason for that is because this surface is somewhere between low gloss and matte textured. So when I turn the display to face my window grills, I can still make out the horizontal window grills. Let me show you another pen display with a matte textured surface. So when I turn to face the window, I cannot see any horizontal window grills. I don't even see the window. So what's the compromise? Well, this surface is smoother, but the image quality isn't really affected. The other surface is more textured, so you get that more tactile drawing experience, but the image quality is affected by the slight film grain and color noise. Due to the 4K resolution, some of the user interface for certain drawing apps may not scale properly. For example, with Medibank, you can see the icons, the text, the palettes, they are really small. But there's a very easy fix to this. All you have to do is right-click on the app, go into Properties, and under Compatibility, change high DPI settings. Under high DPI scaling override, put a check mark here and have the scaling performed by the system instead of the application. After you've done this, OK, restart the app. So now the user interface elements are bigger, and this is the same UI scaling used by Windows. The other way to adjust the UI scaling is to go into the settings for the app you are using and see whether it's possible to adjust the UI scaling over there. To use this display in portrait orientation, you have to use Windows settings to change the orientation. I'm not sure if there is auto rotation. The auto rotation provided by the OSD menu just rotates the OSD menu and not the Windows desktop. This display is not a plug-and-play display in the sense that if you want to use all the features, which includes the pen support and touch support, you have to go through some setup which will take some time. So you have to install some software first. You have to install the ASUS Dial and Control Panel from the Windows App Store, followed by ProArt Creator Hub. And you have to go into Windows Control Panel under Tablet PC Settings, Configure Pen and Touch Display to enable the pen and touch support. So after setup, notice the display actually moved. That is why I don't like plastic feet. They should have used rubber feet for more grip on the table. So after you have installed all the drivers and do all the setup, you now have pen support and finger gesture support. One important thing you need to know about touch gesture shortcuts is Windows will support its own set of gesture shortcuts, and the drawing app you use will support its own set of gesture shortcuts. And if the shortcuts are similar, there may be conflicts. For example, I can use 3 fingers on the touchpad here to minimize apps. I can swipe up to open the apps. I can tap with 3 fingers to call up the search box. Now, on the ASUS display, if I use 3 fingers to swipe down, notice I am moving the artwork around. That's because I have already disabled the Windows shortcuts on the ASUS display. If I did not disable the shortcuts, when I do this action here, I will minimize the app. So I have already customized 3 fingers tap to open the color palette here. If I did not disable the Windows gestures here and use 3 fingers to tap, I will call up the search box. And with these app concepts, I have also configured 4 fingers to open the layers palette. To disable the Windows-specific gestures on the ASUS display, you have to go into Windows Settings, Bluetooth and Devices. Under Touch, disable 3 and 4 finger touch gestures. At the time of making this video, there are very few drawing apps that support customization for finger gestures. So most of the drawing apps out there actually just support the basic navigation gestures such as pen, zoom and rotate. And notice as I am zooming in and out, there is slight delay. So this is not as responsive compared to touch screens on Windows tablets or touch screens on those Windows laptops. Having said that, this is, I would say, still responsive enough, so this is not going to affect my drawing experience. I'm not sure if you can see it, but there is a slight gradation at the top, like a slight drop shadow at the top. So the backlight is not 100% even. Anyway, it's a really minor issue. I just want to point that out in case you can see it. Not all Windows-specific gestures can be disabled. For example, when I'm drawing with my palm on the display, if I accidentally swipe in from the right side, you can see the notification panel actually pops up. If I'm using this as the only display, the notification panel will pop up here. So it's kind of irritating when that happens. Let's look at the companion software or the drivers that are available. So this is the ASUS Dial and Control Panel app, which you can download from the Microsoft App Store. This app will let you customize the dial and also the display for use as a control panel. So let's customize the dial first. You can customize the dial with up to 8 shortcuts. To use the dial, you just press here, and notice the dial has appeared there because this is the main and this is the secondary display. I need to use Windows settings to change this to the main display. So now when you press the dial, the UI will appear here. I have set 3 functions for the dial to adjust the brush size, brush opacity, and brush smoothing. This does not work with the pen, so you need to use the dial or the ruler to switch between the different functions. So to change brush size, for example, you can press once and press once again to go into the brush size to change it. So notice as I am turning the dial, the number here will change. So that's actually the brush size changing. Now for these app concepts, I can actually change the brush size by using the slider. And it's quite easy to change the brush size. So between the two, you will have to decide which one suits your workflow. Remember the toggle switch you can use to switch between free turning and the click turning. Well, the click turning doesn't feel that smooth, and also the sound it makes is not nice. So you can create groups of shortcuts for specific apps, and depending on which app is active, those shortcuts can load automatically, so it's quite convenient. Let's look at Control Panel. Control Panel lets you use this whole display as a control panel. So again, you can create shortcuts that are specific to those apps. So for example, if I tap here for Photoshop, this is the control panel for Photoshop, and you can remove the shortcuts or add your own shortcuts and customize all these different shortcuts. There are dials, buttons, and sliders. So when Photoshop is active, the control panel will load automatically after you open the control panel. So now you can use this display as a shortcut control panel for Photoshop. And since all these are customizable, you can create different groups of shortcuts for other apps such as Illustrator, Adobe Premiere, DaVinci Resolve, or any app you use. How useful this is really depends on whether you have any use for this. So for me, I would prefer to run Photoshop on this pen display and get all these keyboard shortcuts from the keyboard. Let's take a close look at the ASUS ProArt pen that uses Wacom EMR technology. So this pen is made with plastic, but the build quality is quite solid. The shape is hexagonal, so it's quite comfortable to hold, especially with the matte textured surface. There is one button here by the side and one eraser at the back. This pen is not powered by battery, so no charging is required. This pen supports tilt, slightly over 4000 levels of pressure sensitivity and palm rejection. And here are the other pens which are compatible with the ASUS display. From the top to the bottom, we have the Stadler Norris Digital Original, Wacom One EMR pen, the Samsung S Pen, the Stadler Norris Digital Jumbo, and the Lamy AL Star EMR pen. If you use the Samsung S Pen, you can buy those textured nibs that can give you a more tactile drawing experience, but of course those nibs will wear down faster on the matte drawing surface. The pen tip is quite firm, so there is minimal to no movement when in contact with the drawing surface. And this is a plastic nib. It's quite smooth on the matte textured surface, but there is still a nice tactile drawing experience. Cursor tracking seems accurate enough. When I hold the pen vertically, the cursor is directly beneath the pen tip, and when I tilt the pen much lower, the cursor is still directly beneath the pen tip. Now, it may look like the cursor is off-centered here, but that's due to my camera angle. Cursor tracking at the extreme edges look alright to me. It's accurate. This pen tip is smooth, but it's not slippery. I notice there is palm rejection, so if I try to draw with my finger, nothing happens. But depending on the drawing app you use, you may have to go into the settings to enable palm rejection first. This display is laminated, so there is no gap between the glass and the LCD beneath. So when drawing, there is no gap between the pen tip and the line beneath. The gap you see is the latency gap as the line is trying to catch up with the pen tip. Let's look at latency. So there is noticeable latency as the line is trying to catch up with the pen tip. But this doesn't really affect me because usually when I'm drawing, I'm not drawing long sweeping lines. This is 60 Hz refresh rate. So when I'm drawing, I don't really notice the latency. Even though this pen display has latency, you can still use this for writing if you want to. Now I notice as I move the canvas, there is this ghosting effect. Let me move this slowly and then fast. Can you see it? So as I move the canvas, I can see the area behind the letters are actually brighter. Yeah, if I move fast, I can definitely see the effect. If I move it slowly, it's not that obvious. So that could be due to the response time, which is 23 milliseconds. There is one downside or limitation with this pen, and it's software related. From what I can see, there's no option for you to customize the pressure curve. The other issue with the driver is you cannot customize the side button, which by default is set to right click, and it should be a right click. However, if you are using a dual display setup, it would be very convenient to set the side button here to switch display so that you can move the cursor from one display to the other and back. So if I want to, for example, move this window to the other display and I want to use my pen, when I move it here, I will have to switch to using the touchpad to move this window here. So I have to switch from pen to touchpad. If there is the switch display feature, I can just drag it here, switch display, and continue to drag it with my pen. But I can't do that because that feature is not available with the ASUS software. The right click is necessary, but it would be great if this pen can have two side buttons where the other button is actually customizable. Let's look at the options you can get with the OSD menu. So you can press this button here to call up the menu and use the wheel or the dial to move up and down, and you can press the dial to enter. So here we have standard sRGB, Adobe RGB, Rec 709, DCI-P3, HDR, which is not selectable, but HDR will come out automatically when the display detects HDR content. Scenery mode, reading mode, and two customizable user modes. You can press the OSD button to go back. So these are the blue light adjustments, image adjustments for brightness, contrast, saturation, hue, color temperature, gamma, black level, RGB tuning. You can also adjust sharpness. I'm not sure what's trace free, aspect control, input range. You can adjust the volume, which is really soft even at 100%. And there is picture in picture, picture by picture mode. and well, other settings. And now let's test the pen performance. So this app is MediBank Paint Pro, and I'm using the ASUS ProArt pen. I also have the Samsung S Pen, and the performance of these two pens is identical. By the way, palm rejection works flawlessly, so I can have my palm on the display and write and draw, and I will not be able to introduce any stray strokes. Now this app does not support double finger to undo, so you have to use either the shortcut or the keyboard shortcut. The most important thing you need to know about line quality and pen performance is it's highly dependent on the drawing app you use. Because for some reason, the ASUS driver, these two, ProArt Creator Hub and the ASUS Dial and Control Panel, they don't have the option for you to customize pen pressure. Which means if you don't like how the pen performs, well, you will have to make do with the performance because you cannot adjust the pressure curve unless the app that you use allows you to adjust the pressure curve, because there are some drawing apps such as Clip Studio Paint, Krita that lets you adjust the pressure curve, and because you can do that, you will have final control over the pressure sensitivity. Let's test the initial activation force. So this is how thick the line is, and let's draw with minimal pressure. I'm not sure if this is the thinnest line I can get. This line looks quite thick, by the way. So I'm drawing slow diagonal lines, and the lines look straight enough to me. There is slight wobble and jitter, but it's not that noticeable unless you are looking for it. Let's see how the lines taper. The taper is not as smooth or as sharp as I want, but it's okay, I guess. Let's see whether we can maintain consistent line width by applying consistent pressure. Now this is also a diagonal line, and the diagonal line looks straight enough to me. So line consistency seems fine. You can draw dots by tapping. Pen performance with MediBank Paint is not that great, so let's try and redo the task with Clip Studio Paint. This is the initial activation force. That's how thick the line really is. And this is how thin the line is. I can see slight wobble and jitter, probably due to my hand. Let me draw a bit more carefully. So there is slight wobble and jitter. And you can see these three lines are thicker compared to the first four lines because I'm holding the pen like this. So now I'm holding the pen from the back. Okay, I need to apply slight pressure to get the lines out. This is slightly better compared to MediBank Paint because I can get thin and the thick lines. And thin and thick. Line transition is quite smooth. Line consistency. There is no stabilization applied for this app and for MediBank Paint Pro. So when the line is thin, I can see slight wobble or jitter. And lastly, dots. With CSP, I can get very thin lines and very thick lines. So the line variation is better with this app versus MediBank Paint. And with CSP, you can adjust the pressure curve for the pen. And this is important because for some reason, the driver from ASUS does not have the option that lets you customize the pressure curve. For apps where you cannot adjust the pressure curve, the line variation that you can get will be limited. Let me show you an example where I just draw this cube by varying the pressure I use. So I can draw thick lines. This is how thick the line is. Sometimes I would draw thin lines like this, thick, thin, Sometimes I may vary the pressure when drawing those specific lines. So from what I can see, most of the lines are quite thick. They are medium thick and very thick. Let me switch over to Clip Studio. So this is CSP. And I'm going to choose a thick brush as well. And I'm going to draw the same box. So as I'm drawing this box, I can already sort of see how the lines are more, how should I say, expressive. I can draw thin lines, thick lines. You can see this line is really thick. And as I draw those specific lines, there is slight variation with the line thickness as well. Because this pen is actually quite sensitive. So as you change the pressure while you are drawing the vertical lines, you can see the line width is not consistent. And this is natural. This should look natural because this is what I will want the lines to look. So as I draw, you can see all these individual lines here, they have slight differences. Of course, sometimes you may want to draw the lines consistently, like have all the lines look the same. But for me, I would like to have the lines look slightly different each time so that it doesn't look too digital. Now compare what I have here versus Medibank Paint. Oops. You can see the lines, the vertical lines, the width is almost consistent throughout. There is no variation at all. And even when I try to vary the pressure to draw the thin and thick lines, most of the lines are still quite thick. So this box here, or this cube here, is not as expressive compared to this one that I have here. You can see the thin line here becomes thick and then tapers down slightly. And as I taper down slightly, there is slight variation due to how much pressure I apply. And all the vertical lines here, they just look more natural to me. When you cannot customize the pen pressure and that affects the line variation, it's going to affect your drawing experience. For example, if you choose a thick brush for drawing and you want to draw thin lines, it's going to be difficult to switch to drawing thin lines because of the lack of line variation. So to draw those thin lines, you will have to adjust the brush size manually. And if you want to draw thick again, you have to adjust. If you want to draw thin again, you have to adjust. So that obviously will affect productivity and workflow. Now, if you have fantastic line variation, you can choose a really thick brush for drawing, and you can just use that single brush to complete your drawing. Because to change brush size, you can just very easily control how much pressure you apply. So you can draw thin lines very easily, and you can still get those broad strokes. In other words, drawing apps that do not have the option to adjust the pressure curve will have limited drawing performance. Photoshop is one app where you cannot adjust the pressure curve, and for some reason the latency performance with this app is very bad. And also when you try to move the canvas, it's also very slow. It's just not responsive at all. And when I draw those tapered strokes, you can see this shoestring effect. Now this is not a problem with the laptop that I'm using, so it's some issue. So when I move Photoshop back to the laptop display, you can see the latency has improved. And it's not due to the 4K resolution of the external display, because there are other apps that can run very smoothly and more responsively on that 4K display. After going through the Photoshop preferences and settings, I wasn't able to find out what's causing the latency. And if you are using Photoshop for drawing and you cannot fix that problem, obviously it's going to be a deal breaker. Clip Studio, as you can see, is way more responsive. Krita is quite responsive as well, and tilt sensitivity works fine. The cursor can follow the direction of the pen, so I can have broad strokes, thin vertical strokes, broad horizontal strokes, thin horizontal strokes. I can have the gradation on the right side, at the bottom, at the top. Let's talk about the state of touch support for drawing apps available on Windows at the time of making this video. So most drawing apps will support the basic navigation gestures like pan, zoom, and rotate, and usually they work quite well. However, not all apps will support the very common double finger tap to undo. So for example, with Minipang, it doesn't work here. With Clip Studio, I can use 2 fingers to undo. If I use 3 fingers, I can redo. So these 2 shortcuts may not be available with other apps. And of course, with Photoshop, you can only pan, zoom, and rotate. Now with Concepts, this app actually supports small finger gestures. So I can use 2 fingers to undo. I can use 3 fingers to call up the color palette and 4 fingers to call up the layers palette. The type of finger gesture support is highly dependent on the app you use. Drawing apps that work best with touch interface are those apps designed mostly for Windows tablets, such as Concepts, which is the app that I'm using here, and Sketchbook and some other apps. So these tablet apps usually have minimal user interface, and most of the controls are actually presented up front, so you don't have to click here and click there to go inside the menu to find the functions of the shortcuts you want. Now if you compare tablet apps like this with desktop apps, many desktop apps will have the menu system, so to use certain functions you have to click and scroll down to find the function you want. So for desktop apps, it's actually more productive to use with a keyboard, so that you can use the keyboard for keyboard shortcuts, and you can draw, use keyboard shortcuts for the functions. It's very smooth, but such apps usually are not very usable without a keyboard. If you use a keyboard, you can have it by the side here or in front here, and since I'm using a laptop, I have it beside here. Now, because the ports are here, it's not possible for me to put these 2 devices as close to each other. I would have preferred the ports to be up here so that I can have this display closer to the laptop, so that I don't have to stretch my hand that far to reach the shortcuts on the left side. Let's talk about drawing experience. If you're using a dual display setup, make sure you set the ASUS display as the main display. So right now the laptop display is the main display. So if I create a new file, Control N, you can see the dialog box, and all the other dialog box, whichever they are, will appear on the main display when your drawing app is actually here. So to make this the main display, just go into Windows settings, under System Display, Multiple Display, select the ASUS display and make this my main display. So now when you create a new file, the dialog box will be here together with your drawing app. By the way, because the resolution of this display is 4K UHD, if you create a file with resolution lower than 4K UHD, when you're drawing, you can see pixelation. Right, let's draw something. The app that I'm using is Clip Studio Paint because this app has the best pen performance. I can get the thick and thin lines to come out very easily, very consistently, and the lines, they taper very smoothly, very naturally. So I actually have my other hand on the keyboard, so I can choose between using my finger gestures for navigation or the keyboard for navigation. Okay, let's draw. I'm just going to draw something really quickly. It's a skateboarder. This app has undo as well, but I just prefer to use the keyboard shortcuts for undo because my hand is already on the keyboard. I don't have to switch between the drawing mode to undo mode and back to drawing mode. I know some people, they prefer that, especially when you are working with a tablet like the iPad or the Samsung tablets. But the reason why you do that is because on the iPad, you probably don't have a keyboard. But if you have a keyboard by the side, it's gonna be more productive with one hand on the keyboard. Okay, so let's draw this. Okay, the lines or the pen is really sensitive. So notice as I zoom in, I'm using the keyboard. Oops, I accidentally hit undo. So that's one issue that you may have to take note of, the accidental undos. Let's have the eyes be in the center. Okay, this pen is actually quite sensitive. I like that. Even though the pressure level is 4,000, which is not as high compared to other pens out there right now with 8,000 levels of pressure sensitivity, but it is sensitive enough for, drawing purposes. And with the right app, I would say it's definitely good enough for creating professional art. See how the lines taper here for the hair? If you use apps where you cannot adjust the pressure curve, you will not be able to get tapered lines like this. Or the tapered lines will look very unnatural because they taper very abruptly. Okay, I think my chin is kind of off. Let me just erase this part here. I can use the eraser on the back, it works fine. But again, because my hand is on the keyboard, oops. Okay, it's still in eraser mode. Let me switch to the brush mode. Because my hand is on the keyboard, it's easier for me to activate eraser there rather than switch from drawing mode to eraser mode. I know some people, they prefer that, but for me, it's way more productive to have my other hand on the keyboard at all times. I can undo easily by hitting the keyboard instead of this. Oops, the lips too thick. Okay, so you have the neck here. The lines that I can get, okay, so as I try to move, I accidentally hit or activated undo, so I have to redraw that again. As long as you are very precise about your finger gestures, you shouldn't have too much accidental undos. So the lines are quite expressive. I can get thin lines, thick lines, thin lines. And this really makes your drawing look more expressive as well when you have this combination of thin and thick lines. Okay. After a while, you will definitely get used to using a touch screen, especially if you are coming from using those screenless tablets. For me, I wouldn't say having a touch screen is a main selling point. It's a nice feature to have, but it's not really a main selling point for me because I'm so used to using a keyboard shortcut. Another thing that affects drawing experience is the taskbar at the bottom with all these buttons. So I'm right-handed, so sometimes when I'm drawing, I may accidentally hit one of the buttons here, which just happened by the way. So you can move this taskbar to the top, but with Windows 11, you have to find out how to do that because it's no longer in the settings. You can move all these buttons to the left side using Windows settings, but you can't move these buttons here. Notice I have not been using the dial here because if I want to change brush size or use any of the shortcuts here, I can just use my keyboard shortcuts. I don't need to use that dial. I don't need to move my hand to the dial and move back to the keyboard. Okay, now the drawing experience, as in the matte textured surface, feels really good for drawing. There is texture. The texture is on the smoother side, but there is still texture. This pen tip is not, this pen tip is not considered slippery on this surface, which is good because when you are drawing, you want to have more control. You don't want to have the pen tip be so slippery. I can zoom in and out very easily. Now the line wobble or jitter with Medibank Paint is not obvious here. So when I'm drawing with my normal speed. I don't have any issues with latency when drawing at normal speed. And I also don't have any issues with the ghosting or retention issue that I mentioned earlier. So drawing experience is actually pretty good. Let me fill this with black and hit the brush to have some white laces here. So far so good. And 4K resolution really is quite satisfying to work with. When you create a file with high resolution, you can actually zoom in all the way and the visuals will still look very sharp. So if you are using this display for graphic design work, like with vector graphic design, all the visuals will look really sharp. Let's draw some diagonal lines. This looks straight enough. Let me just turn this canvas here. Okay, let me make this line thinner. So far, I have been drawing with this single brush. I did not change the brush size. I did not change the brush, so I'm still able to get the thin and thick lines without changing the brush size, which is very convenient. Let's add some colors. I'm using the fill bucket too. The coloring process is quite straightforward. So if you cannot customize the pressure curve and the app that you use does not have the ability to let you customize the pressure curve, well, you probably will not want to buy this pen display just to find out later that you cannot customize the pressure curve. This 15.6-inch display is a pretty comfortable size to work with for drawing. And while drawing, I did not experience any issues with palm rejection other than the issues that I mentioned earlier regarding those buttons at the bottom. The drawing experience, or my drawing experience, is quite positive. But as mentioned many times, the drawing experience really depends on the app you use. I have tested Affinity Photo, Photoshop, Clip Studio Paint, Medibank Paint, and Concepts, Sketchbook, Krita. Out of those apps, CSP has the best performance in terms of line quality. Let me show you this other app, Concepts, which is designed for tablets for touch interface. And this app works really well with touch, except tilt doesn't work. So usually when I'm coloring, I will tilt the brush to get the broader strokes. So now you can see it's thin, but if I tilt the brush, it's still thin. So yeah, tilt doesn't work with this app. I have already enabled tilt, so if it doesn't work, it's not going to work. Tilt works with Photoshop and with Krita and with Sketchbook. I've also tested with the Samsung S Pen, and well, tilt doesn't work as well. Alright, to conclude, the hardware is good. The visual quality of this display is fantastic. It has good color support and the brightness is higher compared to many other pen displays that I have tested. And the pen performance with Wacom EMR technology is pretty good. However, as you have seen earlier, the pen performance really depends on the app you use. So I don't actually have any issues with the hardware, but for the driver and software, I hope ASUS can improve and add more features, such as adding the display switch feature, which is going to be so useful for many people who use dual displays out there. And definitely add the ability to customize the pressure curve, because that's a very basic feature that should be available to all pen displays. without the ability to customize the pressure curve, the line variation that you can get from even a really good pen is going to be limited. So these are the two software issues that I discovered that can be potential deal breakers. So how does this ASUS pen display compare to the pen displays from other companies, such as the ones that I've reviewed over the past months and years? Well, overall, this works fine. So my main issue is just you cannot customize the pressure curve with the ASUS driver. I would say the pen performance here is good enough to create professional art. Having said that, the pen performance from companies known for their pen displays is slightly better. Alright, I hope this review is useful. Thanks for watching. See you guys in the next one. Bye.